I'm sorry. It's been so long. There's no excuse. I suck. Anyway, on to the tutorial. I just want to say first off, thank you guys so much for the response on part 1. It's really cool to see people following along and actually learning a little bit from what I came up with there. So thank you for all your thoughtful comments and requests for part 2. I heard them. I'm sorry. Small plug real quick. The reason it took so long to get around to part 2 is because I was working on another YouTube channel, so if you're interested in some of the other special effects I got going over there, I'll put a link right on the screen. If you see any effect in any of the videos over on that channel that you're really interested in learning how to do, please leave a comment and I will get around to them. I'm planning on doing a lot more of these in the future. Anyway, so without further ado, let's jump into part 2. Bear with me here. Here we are in After Effects, and if you remember where we left off last time, we just had the X-Wing, some animation, the water and mountains in the back, and some displacement and glow. The next thing we're doing on our list is the water. So let's go ahead and create a new solid. Can be any color, and we're just going to name this water. Then I like to change the layer color to blue, so that way it stands out from the rest as the water. Next, what I want to do is solo this layer, because we don't need to be rendering anything underneath it quite yet, and it's just going to help us go a bit quicker. Go up to Effect, find Trap Code, and then use Particular. So what we want to do in Particular is get the particle emitter to follow this null we created a little bit ago in the previous tutorial called Heat Location. And the way to do that is in Particular, Alt-click on the position X, Y, and the position Z stopwatch. I'm going to drag this up to give ourselves a little bit more room. There we go. And then click Heat Location, hit P on the keyboard to bring up its position information. Then of position X, Y, we're going to drag the Pick Whip tool down to Position. And for position Z, we're going to drag it down to just this third value, which represents the Z of Heat Location. Drag this back down so we can see what that did. And if you take a look now, the water particles are following the heat location null. So this is good, but it's not quite what we want yet. In order to get it to touch the surface of the water, we first need to find out where the water is. So click this button here and turn off the shy that we turned on earlier. Find either one of your water layers and hit P and look at its value. So it looks like the Z is at about 720. Turn on the solo for this layer as well, just so we can see the water. Then we're going to scroll back up and select our water layer. Hit U on the keyboard 2 times, and it's going to bring up the expression information. On position XY, click in the expression, and we're going to type something. Type plus, open bracket, 0, 720, close bracket, and then if you take a look at the particles, they're actually now on the surface of the water. So scroll back down, go ahead and turn off the solo for the water layer. Turn back on the shy just to clean up our comp a little bit. Now in Particular, we need to start actually making the water spray. So forgive me, this is going to be pretty heavy, so if your system isn't super powerful, you're probably going to see some lag. But the first thing you want to do is change direction to directional, and then crank up your velocity to somewhere close to about 9,000 is what I used in the original. Then if you scrub through, you can see the direction that it's spraying. So go ahead and change the rotation until it's spraying backwards and up just a little bit. If you can't quite see the particles, go ahead and change the particles per second up until you can. And if you scrub through, there we go. You have something just about like that. Next, switch the emitter type from point to box, and then change the emitter size X to somewhere around, I'd say about 500-600. The emitter Y is going to stop around 3, and then the emitter Z in the original I put at about 1500. Just know that all these values are rough estimates and that they all are subject to change later depending upon your liking. So the next thing you want to do is go into Particle, change the particle size to about 40, and then scroll up and change the particles per second up until it's so thick you can't quite see too much black in between the particles. About 6,000 looks good. Next, scroll down to where you see shading, and then turn Shadowlet from main to on, and that just gives you some depth to your particles. Scroll all the way back up and close your particular tab. Go over to the Effects and Presets panel and type in Median, and then drag that below Particular. Turn on Operate on Alpha Channel and change the radius to somewhere around 12. Next, we want to add a matte choker. And then we're going to choke out to about -90, looks about good. Next, over in Effects and Presets, type in CC Glass. Drag that on. With CC Glass, make sure that the bump map is set to none. The softness you want down to somewhere close to 0. I set mine to about 2. The height somewhere up to about 58, 59. And the displacement all the way down to 0. Under the Shading tab, we want to turn the diffuse to somewhere about 5. There we go, you can see we're starting to get somewhere now. Next, we want to add some Force Motion Blur. No need to change the settings there. After that, we want to add some Fast Blur. Change the blur dimensions to horizontal and set the amount to about 20. Then let's add a curves adjustment. And let's change the blue channel up just a little and maybe pull down some of the reds just to highlight some of the blues. There we go, that looks about good. If you turn on the motion blur for water and then again for the comp, you can see now we have our spraying water. Last thing I forgot to mention, take the water and move it down below Element 3D. One thing that's important to do that I forgot to mention is as soon as you turn off the solo for water, you're going to be able to see the water layer underneath it. So be sure to further adjust your curves until your water particles matches your water layer underneath it. I went ahead and already did that. The next thing to do is to grab your water layer, duplicate it, then delete all of the effects out of the second copy, the one that's on top. Then go into Particular, change the directional spread up to 30, then change the blending mode to Soft Light. So at this point what I'd like to do is reposition the camera to match the original example. So the way I'm going to do that, first shut off motion blur so it goes a bit quicker. Go up to the camera tool up here, click and hold, and then choose Track Z Camera. We're going to move in just a bit. Then we're going to click and hold the tool again and choose Orbit Camera Tool. We're going to drag right to go just behind the X-Wing. Switch between these tools and keep playing around and moving until you find an angle that you think looks good. I'm going to stop mine right about there because that looks pretty good to me. However, one thing you might notice if you look really closely is we're actually coming to the edge of the mountains comp that we created earlier. So what we're going to need to do is extend that even further than we did before. So go ahead and turn off Shy, find your mountains, then go to the Effects controls, and we're going to change output width from 300 to 4. There we go, looks like that did it. Don't forget to save your project every once in a while. It's always a bummer when it crashes and goes away. This next part's a bit tricky. We're going to be moving on to the air particles that come off behind the X-Wing. So to do that, we need to grab our main X-Wing comp, the one that we're currently working in now. We're going to need to duplicate it, open up the second one. First thing, go to Composition Settings, and we're going to name this Custom Emitter. Go ahead and delete everything out of here except for Element 3D. Then under the camera settings, go ahead and toggle through these until you find the one that shows the back of the X-Wing. In my case, it's left because that's the way my scene is oriented. Go up to the camera tool, click and hold, choose Track XY Camera, drag it till the X-Wing's about in the middle. Next, we need to create a new solid, Control Y for that. Make sure it's white, click OK. Then grab the pen tool, and we're just going to draw a very, very, very rough shape around the edge of the X-Wing. There we go. Go back to active camera and solo your shape that you just drew. Go ahead and level that out there. And there we go. This is going to work as our custom emitter coming off the back of the X-Wing. Alright, next, what we need to do back in the X-Wing comp is grab our custom emitter, drag it back on top. Then we need to change it to a 3D layer. Find the body null Click it, press P for position, do the same with the emitter. Go to the very first frame, copy the position information from body, and paste it onto the position of the custom emitter. Next, go forward until you can see it in the frame, and we need to rotate it 90 degrees so it matches the X-wing itself. Then if you want to take it a little bit further, which isn't super necessary as you won't actually be able to see this layer, you can go back to the body and hit rotation, go to the very first frame, copy the Z rotation, and paste it onto the custom emitter, just so it follows it a little bit better. My bad, it didn't look like those lined up, so let me fix that real quick. There we go. One thing you might see happening is the custom emitter rotating opposite that of the X-wing. That just means that it's rotated 90 degrees the wrong direction. So go back to the orientation that we changed earlier, and if it was positive 90, type negative 90 degrees. The last thing to do is to change the scale so that way it matches. So go ahead and just do that by eye. Press S on the keyboard and just scale up till it looks about right. I'd say probably about 220, 230 looks about good. All right, and so before we move on, just so we can work a bit quicker, I want to shut off motion blur if you haven't already. And I also want to turn off our water particles, so that way we can actually scrub through a little bit better and have it load up for us. So the next thing we need to do is create the layer that's going to contain the particles that will be coming off the back of the X-wing. Those particles are going to be using this white layer as their custom emitter. So let's go ahead and create a new solid, Control Y on the keyboard. We're going to call this air particles. Move this up to the top, just above custom emitter. Make sure air particles is selected, then go up to Effect, Trap Code, Particular. First thing I want to do is go to emitter type and change it to layer. Then look down here, you'll find something called layer emitter. For the layer, choose our custom emitter. Just so I can see what that's doing, I'd like to solo the air particles, and you can actually see that they are coming off. You look really closely here, you can see that they're coming off of the layer that we've just created. Obviously not in the way we want to yet, but we will get there. So the first step is to change the direction to directional. Scrub through here just so you can see which direction they are moving. Looks like they're pushing away, like out in front of where the X-wing would be. We don't want that. So let's change the direction by rotating it. If you're having a hard time seeing which direction they're coming off, crank the velocity up a ton, and also the particles per second. So it appears they are flying backwards now, the direction we want them to. Maybe just a little too high. Let's angle those down. And there we go. Looks like we got ourselves the beginning of some good air particles. Next, I want to change the directional spread down to a very low number, if even 0. Maybe 1 or 2 will suffice. Still looks like it's pointing up. Let's angle that down. And while this is soloed, let's go ahead and turn on the motion blur for this layer and for the comp again, just so we can get a better idea of what this is doing. Scroll down to Particle, open that, change Sphere to Cloudlet, and then let's change the size from 5 to I'd say about 30. Let's also turn up the size random just to get some variability in there, and the opacity random as well. There we go. Last thing, scroll down to shading, and let's change the shadowlet on for both the main and auxiliary channels. Don't forget to save. It's tragic when you lose your work. Next, we can shut off the solo, and we can also shut off our custom emitter visibility, and it appears as though we have something about like that, which is exactly what we wanted. You can see the particles coming off the edges of the X-wing, you can see them coming off the back, and it's just creating this nice air force field as it travels through the air. Next thing I want to do is change the blending mode of these air particles to soft light. And you can see that's starting to look pretty good. However, if you look really closely, you can still see that it's covered in spots, as if these were individual particles, which is not what we want. There's a few different ways that we can fix that, but the main one would be to crank the velocity up a lot higher. Let's stop at about 7,000. Now you can begin to see what that's doing. It's looking pretty good. There's a few things I can say about this, is maybe the particles are a bit too small, and also maybe it's a bit too intense. So let's click back on our air particles, scroll back down to the size of the particles, and I want to change that up to 40. And then I want to change the opacity of this entire layer down to, say, about 20%. It may not look like much, but trust me, it makes a big difference in the end result, just giving some volume to the air that we're putting this X-Wing in. So next, what we're going to be taking care of is the camera movement that went through this animation from beginning to end. First thing I want to do before animating the camera is turn off motion blur, go to your Element 3D layer and scroll down to the bottom, and for the output, change it to draft. So the first thing I want to do is go to about the middle of the timeline, turn on our water layers so that way we can see this detail and we know where it's going to line up in relation to our camera as we're moving things around. Click our camera, click the drop down arrow, and then also click the drop down arrow for transform if it's not open already. And then let's make some small adjustments. I want to go up here to my camera tool, click and hold, and grab the track XY, and let's just move it down just a little. There, that's about good. Next, I want to create a keyframe at this point for the point of interest and the position. I want to go back to the very beginning. I'm going to change my view from active camera to top, just so you can see what our camera is doing. You can see the edge of the X-Wing right about here. If we want, we can drag over just so we can see a bit more about where we're doing. So right here at the beginning, I want the camera to appear as though it's almost looking for the X-Wing. It's trying to find it in its field of view, and I feel like that just exaggerates how fast we're trying to make it appear as though it's going. So I'm going to pan it to the left some, just so maybe we can see the tip of its nose. Now let's take a peek at what that looks like. Go back to active camera. It's okay that you can see the edge of the mountains. We'll be fixing that very soon. Now the thing I want to do is push the camera back in Z space just a little bit, just so it has that movement where we're coming over across the water, moving into the X-Wing. Let's also bring the position up some and then track it further left. Again, this is all up to personal style, this portion of the tutorial, but I'm just kind of walking you guys through about what I would do. So these keyframes later, the position that we set up that we decided we like, I changed my mind. I want that to get into position a little bit earlier than before. So I'm going to drag that back to about the 1 second mark. Maybe a little earlier than 1 second. And I also want to ease. That looks pretty good. Now the next thing I want to do is go to about the 4 second mark and then make some adjustments to our camera just to mix it up a little bit. And then last but not least, let's go to the very end and adjust it just one more time. Again, all of these are very subtle adjustments. You don't want to be making too big of changes. I don't like being able to see the bottom edge of that water, so I'm going to scoot my camera up just a little bit. I'd call that about good. So now the very last thing we want to do for camera movement is create the camera shake, as if we're following this X-Wing on another ship or a boat of some kind. It's going to have a lot of those vibrations. And the way I do that is I'm just going to create a new null object, hit enter, rename this camera shake. I'm going to go to the very first frame, go to the position, alt click, type in wiggle, open parentheses, 4, 5, close parentheses. So you can see that that's just shaking around a bit. Again, the amount of wiggle is up to your preference, but this is just a number that I liked. Next, we're going to take the camera tool and parent it to camera shake. One last thing, don't forget to make the null a 3D layer. So next we got to fix those areas where you can see the ends of the mountains. To do that, all we have to do is turn off shy, find our mountain layers, and extend them. Maybe we can set this one to 500. Let's go back, scrub through here, make sure everything's looking okay, go back to the beginning. Looks like this one needs to be extended just a bit more. Maybe we can set this one to 500. That's looking better. So the very last thing we're going to be covering in this tutorial is getting the coloring to look all cohesive. So to do that, we're going to have to bog down our systems a little bit by making it look as close to the final render as we can before we start applying color. So we're going to go find a good middle frame where you feel like you can see the mountains and the water and everything. We're going to turn back on the motion blur for our comp, find Element 3D, change the output back to full render. Okay, one thing I just realized I accidentally did, don't kill me, but we accidentally messed up our displacement map for what's coming off the back of the, I guess, turbines here. So we need to go back into our displace comp, go to the very first frame, and the camera that this comp is using in order to line up our displace was created before our animation. So what we need to do is go back to our X-Wing comp, grab our camera with all of our animation, copy with Control-C, go back to displace, paste, and delete the old camera. So now we should be all set and back ready to go again. I'm very sorry about that. I totally screwed that up, but we should be good. Anyway, sorry about that little detour. Back into color. One thing that I did in the original that I would like to recreate is I had this water shine coming from this hot spot in the sky. And that was a very, very simple thing that I think added a ton of quality to the final piece. So the way I did that was I created a new adjustment layer, put it below Element 3D, then took a mask and drew a shape that looked kind of like this. I know it's kind of obscure, just bear with me. Then we're going to go to Curves, drag that onto our adjustment layer. Real quick, I want to rename this Shine. And then we're going to just bump up the brightness. And then we're going to feather it out, probably somewhere close to 350%. And so essentially what that has done is just created this light fall off that might be coming from maybe where the sun is behind all of this overcast. And in my opinion, it just adds a whole lot to the detail of the water itself. And last but not least, we're going to do an overall color grade to this piece. So we're going to create another new adjustment layer, put it at the very top of everything, and I'm going to rename this to Color Grade. The first thing I want to do is maybe add some levels, and maybe we can just bump the contrast of this whole thing just a little. There, that looks about good for levels, so let's go add a curves adjustment to this. Maybe we can bring out some more blues and pull down some of the reds. Maybe let's yank out some of the reds in the highlights. I don't know, it's starting to look pretty Star Wars-y. Again, this is all up to your personal taste. I also want to add a hue and saturation instance. I want to go to the reds, yes. And I want to play with this hue just a little bit in the reds. Maybe about -4 looks about good. Let's definitely lighten it up some. Pull down the saturation just a touch. Let's go to our master and let's desaturate this probably about -15 or so. I'm going to switch back to full so I can get a better idea of how this whole image is working. That's looking pretty good so far. Now I want to add an instance of brightness and contrast. Maybe about 25 on both. I'm really exaggerating the color here. There we go. I like that a lot. And now the very last thing I want to do just to wrap up the final stylistic look of this piece, select absolutely everything. Go to Layer, Pre-Compose, name this X-Wing Animation Comp 2, or whichever you'd prefer, really, it's up to you. In this new comp, let's go ahead and scale it up to about 102%, and that's going to get rid of all of our edge problems that we've had because of our displacement layer. And then, because why not, I just like the way it looks, and it's Star Wars. Obviously, you should be more exact than I am being right now, but just for sake of tutorial, I'm going to throw on a letterbox, set that to subtract, and voila, it looks pretty cool. Alright guys, that just about wraps it up for the X-Wing Element 3D tutorial part 2. Sorry it took so long to get it out to you. Thank you for being patient, and I think it turned out pretty good. You can see the original and the tutorial versions are fairly similar. The only thing I skipped was the light rays for the sake of time. It is a very similar process to the tutorial Andrew Kramer has on his website, give or take a few subtle differences. So if you have any questions pertaining to how I did the light rays specifically on this version, go ahead and let me know in the comments. Maybe I'll make a part 3 to this tutorial, we'll see. Other than that, head on over to Pixel Bros, check out those videos over there. Let me know if you want any tutorials on those special effects. I've been working really hard on them. I hope you guys enjoy them, but until then, I will see you guys next time.